So you've probably seen all the news swirling around Block Beasts lately, right? The resignations, the very public statements.
Yeah, it's been hard to miss.
Exactly. And a lot of you have sent us bits and pieces asking, what's really going on. So consider this our attempt to, well, figure that out.
And today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're diving into a pretty revealing YouTube transcript. It features Jan Van Aken, Bob Smid, and Daniel Padoon.
Right? These are former board members of the Stitton Black Box, the foundation part.
Precisely. And we're going to unpack the whole complex situation based on what they've shared.
Our goal here is pretty clear. Sift through these different accounts, try to understand the core issues, and pull out the key takeaways for you. Give you the informed view without you having to piece it all together.
Definitely. And to really get a handle on where the friction started, you absolutely need to understand the basic setup of BlackBix.
It's not just one thing, is it?
No, it's fundamentally two parts. You've got the nonprofit stitching black box, that's where the donations go. And then there's the for-profit BV, Het Systeem BV.
The production company.
The production company, yeah. And crucially, initially, it was 100% owned by Flavio Piscino. Keeping that split in mind is pretty vital as we go through this.
Okay. So where did the trouble really begin? Was it that BV structure?
Well, according to Jan Van Aken, the seeds were definitely sown right there. Even back in 2021, 2022, when he was first involved, Jan apparently felt that the shares of that BV, they really should have been under the stitching.
Under the nonprofit's control.
Yeah, maybe through something like a sticking administrative contour, to allow for broader oversight, broader ownership, essentially.
That's not what happened initially.
No, they went with the setup we mentioned, sticking funded by donations, and a separate BV owned solely by Flavio.
Did Young give any reason why they chose that structure at the time?
He did provide some context. Apparently, it was presented as a way to protect assets. He even mentioned Pim van Rijsek's Koning's Constructie.
Ah, the King's Construction.
Yeah.
For listeners, what's the basic idea behind that kind of setup? Separating things.
Yeah, essentially, the idea is you have a holding entity here, conceptually. That would be the stitching, protecting the really core stuff, like the brand, the content, the IP.
Right.
And then you have a separate operating company, the BV, which handles the day-to-day business, the operations, and crucially, it takes on more of the financial risk.
So the sticking protects the platform? The BV does the production work?
That was the idea, yeah. Sticking protects content, name, platform. BV handles the riskier operational stuff.
Okay. Seems logical on paper for risk management.
Yeah.
But how did this specific BV, Het Systeem BV, actually come about? It wasn't brand new, was it?
No, that's another interesting detail. It was actually an old, dormant BV Flavio already owned called Top Competitive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just sort of repurposed it, renamed it. Apparently this was pitched as a quick fix, especially for sorting out practical things like, getting bank accounts set up quickly.
And the understanding, at least according to Jan Van Aken and later Daniel Padoon, was that this BV, even though it was legally Flavio's, it was meant to eventually come under the stitching, right?
That seems to have been the sheer assumption, yeah. Because fundamentally, it was being funded by the stitching's resources.
Resources from donations.
Exactly. Financial donations, but also, massive amounts of volunteer time and effort, in-kind contributions.
Which really raises a key question for anyone listening, I think. If an organization is built on community support and donations, shouldn't that community, via the nonprofit arm, ultimately own and control how it operates?
That's the absolute core of the tension here. And it leads us straight into the first sort of visible signs of trouble. Jan was on that first board back in 2022.
Who else was on that board?
Stefan Nordhoek and Dirk Nijgen, and why they left.
Well, it gives us a really crucial early warning sign about the problems that blew up later.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Why did that first board leave?
The main sticking point, according to Jan, was Studio 3. That's where they filmed shows like Paradiso and De Wilde is Virkant.
Right.
The board found out a contract for this studio had been signed, but without their okay. And apparently it went over the budget they'd set.
Even though the board had specifically said no to it.
That's what Jan relates, yeah. They'd rejected the proposal, but the contract was signed anyway.
Wow. So that points pretty directly to issues with, well, who makes decisions? And who controls the money? Financial oversight.
Exactly. It really foreshadows the later conflicts over authority and financial management. A pattern, maybe?
Okay, so let's jump forward then. June 2024. Flavio puts out a public apology, a mea culpa.
Yeah, acknowledging significant financial problems, about 1.5 tons of debt he mentioned. He admitted mistakes were made.
Including that Studio Paradiso decision specifically. Yes, he referenced that. And interestingly, he also said the old board, the one with Jan, Stefan, and Dirk, had been right to resign. He even expressed respect for them, mentioning Lester Rietveld and Stefan by name.
Which seems odd, considering the later tensions, right? It sounds like an acknowledgement.
It does. It looks like a recognition of those past issues, a validation almost of why that first board stepped down.
But...
Well, based on what happened next and Jan van Aken's account, this apology didn't really seem to lead to fundamental changes in how BLCKBX was actually run day to day.
Right. Jan's take is basically, despite the apology, the core problems with governance, with control, they just lingered.
Exactly. Which leads us nicely into Daniel Padoan showing up around August 2023.
And his first contact wasn't even about joining the board, was it?
No, initially he was just asked if he could lend BLCKBX some money.
Okay.
And then pretty soon after that, Flavio asked him to come on board as chairman, specifically to tackle some issues Flavio himself had identified, mainly around VPB.
VPB. That's the corporate income tax for the BV, right? Vernootschapsbelasting.
That's the one.
Okay, so who is Daniel Padoan? What's his background?
Well, he's an entrepreneur, sold his automation company back in 2021. He was also known for being critical of the COVID-19 policies, involved in some other initiatives too.
Like Ik Wil Film School.
Yeah, and Adembrei.nl. He agreed to help BLCKBX and apparently made it very clear upfront that he really dislikes dishonesty.
So he steps in thinking it's mainly a tax issue.
But what he uncovered, according to his account, was much broader, much deeper. It wasn't just VPB. He found, well, a whole range of organizational and financial messes.
Like what?
Things like accounting problems, VAT issues, value-added tax, potential gift tax liabilities, really high running costs, and just a general lack of clear structure in the organization.
And he noted that since that first board left.
Yeah, he points out that there seems to have been a pretty big gap where financial oversight was, well, lacking, until he got involved anyway.
Which, for anyone listening who runs anything, especially a nonprofit, that gap in financial control is a huge red flag, right? Needs that public trust.
Absolutely. And Daniel's analysis, when he looked at the numbers, it painted a pretty worrying picture.
Despite the crowdfunding success earlier.
Yeah. Even with that initial influx of cash, his assessment showed the financial trends were just not sustainable. He even talked about this plan, everyone on board.
What was that?
It was drawn up after the crowdfunding, aimed at restructuring things, cutting costs, getting things on a stable footing.
Sounds sensible. Did it happen?
Apparently not. That's a key point Daniel makes. This plan was basically never implemented.
So Daniel's experience was one of frustration.
Deep frustration, it seems. He describes making agreements, getting things decided, and then delays. Or things just getting ignored. He even said key people on the team didn't seem to know about changes that had supposedly been agreed upon.
That lack of follow-through sounds like a major point of friction.
It definitely appears to be. And this really ramps up the conflict over the BV, its control, and leads to Daniel eventually being removed as its director.
Okay, so Daniel's getting more worried because the BV, funded by the sticking, isn't actually controlled by the sticking.
Exactly. And adding fuel to that fire, the accounting firm apparently advised that for proper financial management, the BV really should be owned by the sticking.
But Flavio resisted that.
Seems so. Daniel recounts Flavio expressing a strong feeling of personal responsibility for the BV. He apparently briefly considered setting up specific budgets for programs within the BV, but ultimately pushed back against transferring ownership.
And things came to a head when Flavio removed Daniel as co-director of the BV.
Yes, that was a critical moment. From Daniel's viewpoint, how could he fix the organizational problems he was brought in for if he didn't have director-level access and control within the BV?
It highlights that weird contradiction, doesn't it? They were acting like one entity day to day.
But legally, they were separate. And Daniel was understandably concerned that once he was out as BV director, the Stichting board, which he was still on at that point, lost its main line of sight, its control over what the BV was doing financially.
Okay, but eventually the shares did get transferred to the Stichting, right? In January 2025.
They did, yes. The BV shares were formally transferred. You'd think, okay, problem solved, ownership is clear now.
No.
But no, the conflict just shifted. Now it became about who should govern this new setup, who should be on the board going forward.
And this is where Daniel tried to bring back the old board.
That's right. He initiated bringing back Jan van Eycken, Robert Smid, and Stefan Nordhoek to form the new Stichting Board. His logic, partly, was based on Flavio himself having previously spoken positively about them.
How does Flavio react to that suggestion?
Very negatively, apparently. He strongly opposed bringing that specific group back, which led to a complete deadlock.
And what about the team? The people actually working at BLCKBX?
Well, their statement indicated they wanted something different, too. They preferred a more bottom-up structure, it seems, and they explicitly rejected the proposed board that included Jan, Bob, and Stefan.
Did they suggest an alternative?
They proposed someone named Book as an interim director. This whole thing suggests a real clash of ideas about how the organization should run, top-down versus bottom-up. That difference in vision seems like a big part of the problem.
Did Daniel have issues with Book?
He expressed reservations, yeah. Mostly around Book's stance or perceived stance on the BV share ownership issue, and also apparently some concerns about his communication style.
So Daniel felt stuck. Did he try anything else?
He says he made a significant offer, basically offered the keys, control, to the team itself. But according to Daniel, Flavio didn't really engage constructively with that offer.
This sounds like an impossible situation for Daniel as chairman of the Stichting Board.
And that's where Bob Smith's perspective is important. He really highlights the legal duties of a Stichting Board. Things like adhering to good governance principles, ensuring the organization is financially stable, avoiding conflicts of interest, and crucially, the legal responsibility to step in if there's mismanagement.
So Daniel's hands were tied to some extent by those legal duties.
Exactly. It limited his options. He couldn't just hand things over if he felt it wasn't responsible or legally sound.
And he perceived a risk with Flavio's preferred direction.
Yes, he worried about putting someone in charge who was favored by Flavio, especially given reports that this person might have been open to selling the BV shares to outside parties.
Which would completely undermine the whole point of the Stichting owning them.
Precisely. Daniel described it as feeling like the whole organization was being held hostage in this situation. A very difficult spot.
So what happened next? Daniel stepped down.
Yes, Daniel resigned, and then Jan van Eycken, Bob Smid, and a new person, Hans van der Velden, were appointed as the new Stichting Board.
What about Stefan Nordhoek? He was part of Daniel's proposal.
Stefan decided to withdraw his name, apparently to avoid being a continued point of conflict.
Okay, so this new board, Jan, Bob, Hans, what's their approach?
Their stated intention is very much hands-off operationally. They want to focus primarily on financial oversight, ensuring good governance, and critically, making sure those BV shares stay firmly with the Stichting.
And how do they see the BV being run?
They've actually proposed a bottom-up management structure for the BV, run by the team, operating independently from the Stichting Board itself, kind of addressing the team's desire, perhaps.
Yeah, interesting. So where does that leave things now? What's the current situation?
Well, we understand Erwin Toms has stepped in to try and mediate, try to find some reconciliation.
And Flavio.
Based on his recent public comments, Flavio seems very focused on just moving forward, starting fresh, maybe less interested in digging back through all the past disagreements.
Was there a meeting planned?
Yes, a session involving the former board members and the current parties was apparently upcoming. The hope, certainly from Jan and Bob's side, is that black books can somehow survive this, in some form.
And they stressed something else too, didn't they? About media coverage.
They did. The principle of or on or, basically, hearing both sides of the story. They felt that was really missing in how this whole crisis was being reported.
Okay. So wrapping this deep dive up, what are the main takeaways?
Well, it's clearly a super complex situation, deeply rooted in that initial two-part structure, the Stichting and the BV.
Yeah, and evolving fights over control, over direction, and fundamentally who owned the operational part, the BV.
Definitely. And you see this real struggle to balance the founder's vision, Flavio's vision, with the legal, ethical duties of a nonprofit board managing donated funds.
We've heard the different perspectives laid out. Flavio wanting control and his vision, the former board pushing for good governance and protecting the Stichting's mission.
And the team itself wanted a more bottom-up, decentralized way of working.
And it's worth saying again, even with all this detail from the transcript, there are probably still nuances, things we don't see, right? The full picture is likely even more complicated.
Absolutely. You never get the entire story from one source, even a detailed one.
So, this whole affair really shines a light on just how tricky organizational leadership can be. the absolute need for clear structures, good communication, and how hard it is to navigate different visions, especially within a really passionate community like Blickbox's.
Yeah.
It kind of leaves you, the listener, thinking, doesn't it? What is the future for independent media projects like this? And maybe more importantly, what lessons can everyone learn from this, well, very public and difficult chapter for BLEPS?